Black CEO demoted to economy. Airline regrets it. When $500 million disappears, sir, I'm going to need you to move to your reassigned seat. Economy, row 24. The words landed like a slap in the hushed luxury of the first-class cabin. Marla Jensen, the lead flight attendant with the kind of practiced smile that knew how to kill softly, didn't blink as she said it. She didn't ask to see his ticket. She didn't check his name. She just saw a well-dressed black man in seat 2A and assumed there had been a mistake. Elias Warren didn't flinch. He sat back slightly in his seat, one ankle crossed over the other, calm as ever. His charcoal suit fit like it had been stitched into his skin, and the gold pin on his lapel, small, unassuming, gleamed faintly in the ambient light of the cabin. "That's not my seat," he said, his voice even and composed. "It's my assigned seat, first class, paid in full." Marla's smile tightened. "I understand, Mr. Monroe." "It's Warren," Elias corrected, eyes locked on hers now. There was a flicker in her expression. Then that professional smile snapped right back in place, as if even her face was trained not to process what it didn't want to see. "My apologies, Mr. Warren, but due to a last-minute VIP request, we've had to shuffle some seats. I assure you, row 24 in economy is quite comfortable, and we'll be happy to provide you with complimentary—" Elias raised a hand, just enough to stop the sentence. He didn't shout. He didn't make a scene. But in that moment, the quiet pressure in the cabin shifted. The man in 1D paused his typing. A couple from Seattle stopped discussing their vineyard tour. A flight attendant across the galley went rigid, sensing something had cracked in the polished facade of this flight. "Are you saying that I've been downgraded without notice?" Elias asked. "It's not a downgrade," Marla insisted. "It's a reallocation based on priority." Elias tilted his head. "And what exactly defines that priority?" Before Marla could answer, a voice from behind her chimed in. "Excuse me, but is there a problem?" It was Richard Langford, stepping out from the curtain of first class with the confidence of someone who had never been told no. He was in his 60s, ruddy-faced, expensive loafers, and the smug self-satisfaction of old money clung to him like cologne. "He's in my seat," Richard said, gesturing at Elias. 2A. I requested it." Marla turned, clearly relieved. "Mr. Langford, we're just working on that now. Mr. Warren here is about to relocate." "I'm not relocating," Elias said calmly. Langford snorted. "Well, you can't stay. I asked for that seat. I have a spinal condition. I can't be crammed into some other spot." Elias leaned forward now, his voice still low but more pointed. "You asked. I paid. There's a difference." A murmur moved through the cabin. People weren't just listening anymore. They were watching. Phones subtly turned, camera lenses glinting from seatbacks. A few whispered. A woman up front tapped her husband and shook her head, eyes wide. Marla stiffened. "Mr. Warren, please don't make this difficult. We have protocol." "You mean the protocol that says you can remove a paying passenger without cause because someone else with the right skin tone feels entitled?" Elias said, no longer soft-spoken. Gasps, audible this time. Marla paled. "Sir, that's not—" Elias stood. Not angry, not loud, just certain. "Get me your flight manager. Now." Marla hesitated. "Now," he repeated. She turned and walked briskly toward the galley where Bryce, a lanky flight supervisor in his 30s, looked like he'd rather vanish into the beverage cart. He followed her back up the aisle, posture already apologetic. "I'm told there's an issue, Mr. Warren," Bryce said, trying to sound neutral. "You downgraded me without notification. Reassigned me to economy. For him." Elias pointed subtly toward Langford, who had the decency to look briefly uncomfortable before folding his arms and smirking again. Bryce shifted uncomfortably. "It was a late executive request, sir. Mr. Langford is a platinum-tier investor in our airline. I'm a shareholder," Elias said, cutting him off. Bryce blinked. "Of this airline," Elias continued, "through Valcor Holdings. You may want to check your acquisition memos." Bryce fumbled with his tablet, opened a few menus, and then froze. His face drained of color. The silence was complete. "You're Elias Warren," Bryce said softly, barely above a whisper now. "CEO of Valcor." Elias didn't answer. He didn't need to. The weight of the name filled the cabin without further confirmation. "Is this how North Air treats its shareholders?" Elias asked evenly. "How it protects its brand integrity?" Bryce opened his mouth to respond, but the intercom blared overhead. "Cabin crew, prepare for takeoff." It was too late. The damage had been done. The man they'd tried to demote was the man signing off on their next funding round. The quiet black passenger in seat 2A, the one no one had bothered to verify, was the reason their airline even had a chance to survive a pending merger. Langford sank back into seat 2C without a word. Elias didn't sit. Instead, he leaned slightly toward Bryce and said, "There's a $500 million equity review happening in 3 weeks. Tell your board they just flunked their blind audit." Then he walked back down the aisle, not toward economy, but to the cockpit. Behind him, the cabin sat in stunned silence. Phones buzzed, news spread, and a single choice, thought to be procedural, would soon unravel everything. Because this wasn't just a flight. It was the beginning of a reckoning. The cabin of Flight 739 was 30 minutes into cruising altitude when the real turbulence began, not outside the plane, but inside the hearts of its crew. Bryce stood outside the cockpit, pale and stiff, processing what he had just learned. Elias Warren. The Elias Warren. The man behind Valcor Holdings, the very entity currently in final stage negotiations to acquire 49% of North Air's equity. The man who'd been quietly auditing internal culture protocols, observing service structure, and now had every legal right to halt the airline's most ambitious expansion plan in 2 decades. And they'd bumped him to economy, without so much as a glance at his boarding pass. Bryce's mind raced. This wasn't just a customer service failure. This was catastrophic, a breach that could bleed into the company's bottom line faster than he could call legal. He turned toward the galley, finding Marla standing stiff with her arms crossed, avoiding eye contact. Evan, the junior attendant, hovered near the espresso unit, his fingers nervously adjusting cups that didn't need adjusting. "Do you realize what we just did?" Bryce asked Marla, his voice low and tense. She blinked. "I followed the reassignment protocol. Langford is a VIP. That seat was requested last minute through executive priority." "Did you verify who was already seated?" "I didn't think I had to," she said defensively. "I assumed he was... You assumed," Bryce snapped, then caught himself. His voice softened, but only slightly. "You didn't think a black man in a tailored suit could be the one writing our paychecks." Marla's silence was confirmation. Back in row 24, Elias sat perfectly still, his legs crossed, his demeanor unreadable. But inside, the wheels were already turning. A teenage girl 2 rows back had recognized him. "Mom, that's Elias Warren," she whispered. "He gave the graduation keynote at my brother's university. He's like a big deal." Her mother looked at the man in front of them, then quickly pulled out her phone and began to search. Moments later, her expression shifted from casual curiosity to dawning horror. "Oh my God," she muttered. "That's him. That's Valcor." Whispers rippled again through the cabin, this time more pointed. Elias turned slightly and gave the girl a gentle nod. He didn't need fame, but visibility now served a purpose. Just then Evan approached. "Mr. Warren," he said, voice low and nervous, I wanted to say I'm sorry. I saw what happened. I knew it was wrong. I just didn't know what to do." Elias studied him. "Then what are you doing now?" Evan hesitated, trying not to make the same mistake twice. There was sincerity in his voice, guilt too. Elias nodded. "Then you can start by telling me what Langford said before I was asked to move." Evan's face tightened. "He told Marla he didn't want to be seated next to someone who doesn't reflect the brand," he said slowly. "He didn't name you, but it was obvious. He said it loud enough for crew to hear. No one challenged him." Elias inhaled sharply but didn't flinch. "And Marla didn't push back?" "She didn't even blink," Evan whispered. "She acted like it was routine." Elias leaned forward. "And is it?" Evan looked around, then nodded once. "Not officially, but yes. If a passenger like Langford makes noise, we move mountains. If someone like you does, we assume it's a mistake." The weight of those words hung heavy between them. Just then, Elias's phone buzzed in his coat pocket. A secure app flashed a coded message. "Trigger Clause 14. Audit underway. PR cycle in 18 hours. Legal standing confirmed. Await your call." Elias tapped the message away and stood. The crew was already unraveling. It was time to let gravity take over. At the front of the cabin, Bryce gathered Marla and Evan near the service area. "From this point forward, no one speaks to the media. If passengers ask, we say it was a manifest correction. Got it?" Marla nodded robotically. Evan remained silent, but it was already too late. A passenger in 3C had quietly live-streamed the entire incident. The moment Marla asked Elias to move, the moment Langford called him just another placeholder in a tailored suit, the moment Bryce did nothing, that live-stream had now hit 400,000 views and was climbing fast. Back in the cockpit, Captain Ray Durham received an urgent message on his side screen. "Corporate alert. Confirmed misidentification of VIP shareholder. Secure cabin. Prepare for controlled comms." He stared at the message for a long beat before hitting reply. "Acknowledged. Standing by." Elias walked calmly toward the front of the cabin. Not to confront. Not yet. But to be seen. Passengers turned. Some looked away, embarrassed. Others nodded, ashamed. When he reached the galley, he stopped. "Bryce," he said quietly, "I'd like a word." The flight manager froze, then stepped aside to speak. "Mr. Warren, I deeply regret," Elias held up a hand. "I'm not interested in apologies you were forced to give. I'm interested in patterns. The ones your airline builds quietly into every step of the passenger experience. The ones that let people like Langford speak freely while people like me get reassigned without a question." Bryce swallowed hard. "We're undergoing internal reviews. I can assure you." "You won't need to assure me," Elias said. "You'll need to assure the board. And the public." "Public?" Bryce echoed. "You think the only damage here is internal?" Elias leaned in slightly. "You let a man with a documented history of discriminatory behavior dictate protocol. You removed a high-level stakeholder without verifying identity, and now it's being watched by 500,000 people, with more coming every minute." Bryce paled again. "I was here to observe," Elias said. "Now I'm here to dismantle." And with that, he turned and walked back down the aisle, no longer a silent passenger, but the calm center of a storm building, faster than the airline could brace for. Because this wasn't over. It had just taken off. The ripple effect of Elias Warren's quiet resistance was already spreading before the plane even reached the halfway point across the Atlantic. In the forward galley, Bryce tapped through a stream of notifications on his tablet. Internal alerts, updates from HQ, and now a flagged report from Public Relations. He read the subject line twice before fully processing it. Alert. Viral video. Shareholder moved from first class. He clicked in. The footage was shaky but clear. Marla's voice, Langford's dismissive wave, Elias rising without a single protest, and then Langford's infamous line, "Some people confuse tailored suits with real pedigree." The comments section beneath it was already brutal. Imagine treating a black CEO like a misbehaving intern. North Air just cancelled its future in real time. This is why we say the system isn't broken. It was built this way. Bryce's throat tightened. The clip had hit 1.2 million views in under 40 minutes. Meanwhile, in row 24, Elias sat calmly with his notebook open again, but he wasn't writing. He was listening, calculating. 2 seats behind him, a pair of young lawyers whispered, "That's Elias Warren. I just saw him at a DEI summit 2 months ago. He's the one behind Valcor's Education Equity Fund, right? The guy literally funds airline training programs." The whispers weren't lost on the crew either. Evan passed by with fresh drinks and paused by Elias's row. "Can I get you anything, sir?" he asked, voice more formal now. Elias didn't look up. "No, thank you." But Evan lingered for a second longer. "I just wanted you to know. When I started this job, your name came up in our orientation materials about leadership and ethics. They called it the Warren Standard." Elias finally looked at him. "Did they also teach you how to stay silent when the standard's broken?" Evan flinched. "No, sir, they didn't." Elias gave him a slight nod. "Then now's your chance to start learning." Just as Evan moved on, another voice cut through the cabin. "You should have stayed quiet, man." Langford, loud enough to be heard by half the section. "You think you're helping yourself by making a scene. What, you want sympathy points now?" Several heads turned. A few passengers visibly stiffened, but Langford wasn't done. "You people are always trying to turn everything into a movement." Elias slowly stood, not aggressively, not for show, but with a calm that demanded attention. "I didn't say a word," he said, eyes locking with Langford's. "You're the one making this public." Langford smirked. "Please, everyone's already seen how this works. You'll play the victim, the media will eat it up, and we'll all pretend this wasn't your fault to begin with." Elias's voice remained low. "It's not about fault, it's about exposure. You just volunteered." Langford laughed, but it was hollow now. Up front, Marla tapped frantically on the crew phone, calling Bryce. "He's speaking up," she hissed, "in front of the whole cabin." Bryce's jaw clenched. "Do not engage. Just manage the optics." Back in economy, a woman across the aisle from Elias lifted her phone discreetly, recording. She didn't say a word, just zoomed in on Langford's face, then panned to Elias, then to the tense expressions on passengers around them. And in that moment, the plane felt smaller. Langford tried again. "You think this little stunt scares people like me? I've been flying this route in first class since before your hedge fund even existed." Elias stepped forward, 1 row closer. "I'm not here to scare anyone," he said. "I'm here to observe what happens when power feels untouchable, and then I'm going to document exactly how the system protects it." His tone wasn't dramatic, it was surgical. Passengers watched, frozen between discomfort and admiration. Langford scoffed and sat back with a dismissive wave, but his eyes betrayed a new awareness. This wasn't a typical power play. Something bigger was at stake. And then came the twist. A voice came over the intercom, but it wasn't the captain's. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is First Officer Jalen Ortiz. I'd like to inform you that due to a passenger concern, the flight deck has authorized a mid-flight update to the manifest. We are verifying identities of high-tier stakeholders as part of a compliance audit. Silence. Marla and Bryce exchanged panicked glances. What the hell does that mean? She whispered. Bryce pulled up a secondary app on his tablet. There it was. A new login. Valcor proxy clearance activated. Someone from corporate was already inside the system, validating Elias's identity and matching it to an executive access flag he'd triggered an hour earlier, which meant the higher-ups knew. They weren't just watching, they were responding. Elias walked slowly back to his seat. A man near the window gave him a respectful nod as he passed. Behind him, the girl who had recorded earlier hit upload. Her caption, "The man they kicked out of first class is now being verified by the airline's own executives. They messed with the wrong CEO within seconds. It started trending. Hashtags like Josh Warren audit. Our Elias was right, and Josh's first-class bias climbed into Twitter's top 10. In the cockpit, Captain Durham received one more message. Prepare statement. Apology to Elias Warren to be delivered upon landing. Legal and PR will coordinate. Durham leaned back and rubbed his eyes. It wasn't turbulence shaking the flight now. It was truth. And it was just getting started. The cabin of Flight 714 was tense, like a courtroom just before the verdict. Every sound, tray tables snapping, seatbelt clicks, the distant hum of the engines, seemed amplified. But nothing was louder than what wasn't being said. Langford had gone quiet, but not because he'd run out of arrogance. It was because his arrogance had finally met a boundary. In seat 24A, Elias Warren calmly opened his notebook again, but this time he wasn't documenting the injustice. He was planning its undoing. The captain's voice returned to the cabin, but now more measured, cautious. Ladies and gentlemen, we're currently conducting a routine verification as part of our new compliance updates. We appreciate your patience. That lie hung in the air like stale perfume. Marla stood at the galley phone, her face pale. Bryce, what is going on? What compliance audit? Who authorized that announcement? Bryce's voice cracked over the line. We've been flagged. Someone from Valcor just pinged the system. We're not just dealing with a passenger. He has corporate-level access. Marla's hand trembled. Warren? Bryce didn't respond. He didn't need to. Up in the cockpit, Captain Durham got a direct message from Atlantic HQ. Confirm presence of Elias Warren, CEO of Valcor Group. Full apologies required. Legal and PR will coordinate messaging upon landing. Do not confront or delay. The words, do not confront, hit hard. He turned to his first officer. This just became a PR bomb, and we're flying right into it. Meanwhile, in the main cabin, Evan walked past Elias's row again. This time he stopped, full of hesitation. I saw the stream, Evan said, voice low but sincere. And I just want to say I'm sorry. I knew it was wrong when they moved you. Elias didn't look up. Why didn't you speak then? Evan paused. Because I didn't know if I'd still have a job when we landed. Elias slowly closed his notebook and finally met his eyes. And if you don't speak now, what kind of job are you landing into? Evan swallowed, hard. You're right. In the first-class galley, Langford leaned toward Marla and hissed, Get ahead of this. We can still spin it. Just say there was a tech glitch, a mistaken ID. She turned to him, her voice no longer apologetic. It's too late. Legal already knows who he is, so does the public. Langford's jaw twitched. He tricked us, used a fake name to get a reaction. That's entrapment. It's evidence, she replied coldly. Just then, a message came through on the crew chat system, visible only to senior staff. Mandatory. Flight 714 will land in London, Heathrow instead of Geneva. Corporate delegation awaiting arrival. Immediate media embargo requested. Passenger Elias Warren is to be treated as VIP. Crew involved in seating incident to remain on board post-landing for internal review. Bryce read it and nearly dropped the tablet. His face turned white as the blood drained from it. Marla muttered, "We're screwed." But the real damage hadn't even started. 30 rows back, a woman in a navy blazer opened her laptop and clicked Upload. Her footage, captured from a different angle, showed Marla dismissing Elias at the boarding door, clearly ignoring the name on his ticket. Her video wasn't shaky. It was 4K with clean audio. And she was a reporter. The post's title was simple: "The Day They Demoted a CEO." It took 12 minutes to hit 500,000 views. Back on the plane, a middle-aged black man in business class turned to his seatmate. "You know what gets me? They didn't just question him. They erased him. No check, no ask, just moved him like he didn't exist." The seatmate nodded. "And now the whole world's watching." A ping from Elias's phone broke his stillness. He glanced down. One message. From D. Kendrick, Valcor Legal. Subject: Clearance issued. We're greenlit. Everything you authorized is moving. They'll feel it by the time we hit the ground. Elias locked the screen and turned to the woman seated next to him. She'd been silent the entire flight, headphones in, pretending to nap. But now she removed them. "I saw what they did," she said quietly. "I kept quiet because I thought it would pass. I didn't know who you were." "You still don't," Elias replied, "but you knew what was right." She nodded, shame flickering behind her eyes. Then came the twist no one was ready for. A man approached from the rear galley, tall, older, sharp suit wrinkled from travel. He reached Elias's row, paused, and said, "Mr. Warren, my name is Arthur Green. I'm from the Department of Transportation." Elias raised an eyebrow. "I wasn't supposed to be on this flight," Green continued. "But after I saw the video mid-air, I rewrote it. This plane and its crew are now part of an open federal inquiry into discrimination and corporate abuse of passenger rights." Passengers all around them straightened in their seats. Langford's voice cracked from the front. "What is this? You can't launch an investigation mid-flight." Green turned slowly to face him. "We're not launching it. You already did. We're just confirming the wreckage." He handed Elias a document folder, nodded once, and stepped back. Elias didn't smile. He didn't need to. His silence had done enough. And the descent into London hadn't even begun. When Flight 714 touched down on the tarmac at Heathrow, the cabin lights brightened like a curtain lifting on the final act. But for the crew in first class, it felt more like the lights of an interrogation room. Passengers stayed seated, no one rushing to grab their luggage. Something had shifted. Everyone knew they had just witnessed the beginning of something historic. No one said it out loud, but they all felt it. Marla stood stiff at the galley door, clutching her tablet like it could save her. Beside her, Bryce looked as if he'd aged a decade in the last 30 minutes. Evan, the young attendant, kept glancing toward Elias Warren's seat in the rear section of the cabin, not out of fear, but something closer to respect. Elias remained calm, arms folded, eyes closed. But his mind was calculating, layer by layer. A soft chime rang through the cabin. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain announced, his voice strained, "we ask that you remain seated as our airline team boards for a scheduled customs and compliance check. We appreciate your patience." Scheduled? Not even close. The jet bridge extended, locking into place with a mechanical hiss. And then 3 sharply dressed men stepped on board, suits dark, expressions unreadable. But it was the badges they wore that drew attention. Atlantic Air, Corporate Security, Legal Affairs Division. They didn't speak to the crew. They didn't greet the captain. They walked directly to Elias. "Mr. Warren," the lead man said. "We've been instructed to personally escort you to the VIP exit. Atlantic Air's senior leadership is waiting in the executive terminal to issue an apology." Elias looked up, voice low and steady. "Is Marla included in that leadership group?" The man hesitated. "She has been placed on immediate administrative leave." "And Langford?" The pause was longer this time. "His travel privileges have been revoked pending investigation." Elias stood. Across the aisle, other passengers watched in silence. Not one person reached for their phone, not out of fear, but out of awe. They knew they were watching the moment power shifted. As Elias stepped into the aisle, a murmur followed him. Not gossip, reverence. Back at the front of the plane, Langford stood frozen, arms crossed, like a man who had rehearsed dominance so long he forgot how to lose. As Elias approached, he didn't flinch. "You play dirty," Langford muttered under his breath. "Set us up." Elias stopped just long enough for the air to still between them. "I didn't set you up," he said. "I gave you a chance to act right. You failed." Langford scoffed. "This won't stick." Elias leaned closer. "You're not important enough to erase what's coming." The corporate agents gestured forward, but Elias held up a hand. He turned to Evan, who was still watching from the galley. "What's your name?" Elias asked. "Evan," the young man replied, startled. Elias nodded. "You hesitated, but you didn't lie. That matters. You ever want to work for an airline that's being rebuilt the right way? Have your resume on my desk by Monday." Evan blinked. You're hiring." "I'm restructuring," Elias replied, "and people like you are the future." Evan's jaw tightened as he fought the emotion building behind his eyes. "Thank you, sir." Elias turned back and exited the plane. On the jet bridge, reporters were being held behind barriers, flashes already popping. But Elias didn't stop to pose. He simply walked toward the black SUV, waiting with tinted windows and government plates. Inside the VIP terminal, the airline's CEO, 2 board members, and a shaken PR director waited, all in matching navy suits and identical expressions of corporate apology. But before they could speak, Elias raised a hand. "This is not a photo op," he said. "This is your audit starting." The CEO opened his mouth, unsure whether to offer a handshake or a scripted apology, but Elias waved him off. "I've activated Clause 9, Elias continued. "As of this morning, Valcor is freezing all infrastructure investment and pulling executive shares until a third-party equity council reviews your operational protocols." The CEO turned white. "You can't just pull out. That's 1/4 of our fleet funding. You demoted your majority shareholder because he didn't match your idea of first class," Elias said, "and now you're flying without a parachute." Back on the plane, Marla sat alone in the galley, staring blankly at her tablet screen. A new email notification blinked. Subject: Immediate suspension notice. From HR Division, Atlantic Air details. Pending internal investigation regarding misconduct on Flight 714. Access to systems and crew communications revoked. She read it 3 times before her hands began to shake. Langford, meanwhile, had been escorted off the plane through a separate gate. No cameras, no SUV, no handshake. Just silence. He was no longer a partner, no longer protected. His name, once whispered with admiration, now circulated through group chats with disgust. But the real twist came 30 minutes later, when the financial markets opened. Atlantic Air's stock began to plummet, 4% in the first hour, then 7, then 11. By noon, the airline had lost over $500 million in valuation. News anchors were scrambling. Headlines screamed across every screen. Black CEO demoted mid-flight, $500 million gone in a day. Airline faces collapse after viral discrimination. Corporate culture under fire, the Elias Warren effect. On social media, the video clips of Elias's calm refusal, Evan's visible discomfort, and Langford's dismissive arrogance were stitched into a timeline that exposed the anatomy of a quiet takedown. But Elias didn't speak to the press. He let the silence work for him, just as it had on the plane. Back at his London office, he sat alone, reviewing the internal documents his team had uncovered. Emails, policy memos, algorithmic assignments of cabin priority that had consistently deprioritized passengers with non-traditional executive profiles. That was their term. Non-traditional. Elias closed the file, leaned back in his chair, and exhaled. They had built a system so convinced of its own superiority that it didn't realize how fragile it had become. And now that system was crashing, quietly, beautifully, row by row. The boardroom was colder than usual. Inside Atlantic Air's Manhattan headquarters, the air was sharp with tension. The long mahogany table, usually reserved for investor updates and quarterly celebrations, now hosted a war room of executives, attorneys, and crisis consultants. And at the head of it sat a man who had remained silent for most of the morning. Elias Warren. He wasn't in a tailored suit this time. He wore a simple black crewneck and slacks, clean but unfussy. His eyes scanned the screen in front of him, where a live dashboard showed the real-time drop in stock value, now down 14.2%. Nobody dared speak until he did. Then, without looking up, Elias said, "Pull the Zurich investment." A murmur passed through the room. "But that would tank our European strategy," one board member said cautiously. "It already tanked," Elias replied. "We're just making it official." The PR consultant, a nervous woman in her early 40s, named Dana, leaned forward with a script clutched in her hand. "If I may, Mr. Warren, we've drafted a formal apology for release within the hour. We're recommending that we publicly disavow the flight crew's actions and announce a mandatory bias training initiative." Elias finally looked up. "Bias training," he repeated, voice flat. Dana nodded. "It's what's expected." "No," Elias said. "It's what's performative." He stood slowly, walking toward the screen. "We don't need training. We need an exorcism. This company was built on the assumption that class, comfort, and compliance come from the same place, from whiteness, from wealth. You dressed it up with lanyards and lounge access, but it's still discrimination, just quieter." A pause. Then Elias turned back to the group. "I'm not here to preserve your comfort. I'm here to clean house." 2 seats down, CFO Martin Grayson adjusted his glasses, voice cautious. "And what exactly does that mean, Elias?" "It means we're cutting dead weight," Elias answered. "It means Marla is officially terminated. It means Langford's internal communications, emails, call logs, chat transcripts, are being turned over to the legal department for external review." "On what grounds?" Martin pushed. Elias didn't hesitate. "Systemic obstruction of equity protocols." The room quieted. Elias looked to his chief of legal. "And Bryce?" The woman tapped a tablet. "He submitted a formal resignation. I've declined it. He'll stay on until we complete the investigation. If misconduct is confirmed, we press charges." Elias nodded. "Good." Outside the boardroom, the media was in full swing. Cable networks were calling it the most expensive act of discrimination in aviation history. Social platforms had crowned Elias a quiet revolutionary, memes forming around screenshots of his still, composed face with captions like, "The calm before the corporate storm." But the real shock came later that afternoon. A whistleblower package landed on the desk of journalist Nadine Rios, a reporter with a reputation for taking down giants. Inside the padded envelope were internal memos dating back 5 years, outlining deliberate strategies for reshaping Atlantic Air's first-class demographics. The term image management appeared 27 times. Passenger prioritization algorithms had filters based on optics alignment. One note, handwritten, read, "Seat 1A must always reflect brand prestige." Nadine didn't need more. By 6 p.m., her expose was live. Headline, "You weren't crazy. Atlantic Air profiled you on purpose." Within minutes, it exploded. Tens of thousands of former passengers, Black, Latino, South Asian, anyone who'd ever felt that subtle sting of displacement, flooded comment sections, sharing their own stories. I was moved for weight balance when the guy next to me was 30 pounds heavier. They offered me $300 to take a later flight, said my seat was needed for a platinum client. I was already platinum. One woman posted a video of her husband being pulled from first class 3 years earlier. No one had believed her at the time. Now it was part of the evidence. Inside Valcor's strategy office, Elias stood beside a tall window, overlooking Midtown Manhattan. Evan, the young flight attendant from Flight 714, entered quietly. He looked different, more sure of himself. "Sir," he said, holding a printed letter, "you asked me to put this together. My resignation." Elias didn't take it. "You still think you need to resign?" Evan hesitated. "I didn't speak up when I should have." "No," Elias said, "but you did something most people never do. You listened. Then you changed." Evan looked away, eyes stinging. "I was scared." "So was I," Elias said. "Every time I walked into a room like that. Every time I sat in a seat I paid for and still had to prove I belonged in." He walked toward Evan and tapped the resignation letter. "Keep it. Frame it. So you remember the day you decided not to run anymore." Evan's shoulders sank with relief. "Thank you." "One more thing," Elias said. "You're going to help write the new onboarding policy for all domestic crew. First drafts due Monday." Evan's mouth fell open. "Wait, what? You wanted to make things better. Now's your chance." That night, as the city lit up outside his office window, Elias sat alone with a fresh folder on his desk. Inside were the beginnings of a plan, not just for Atlantic Air, but for the industry. He scribbled one sentence across the top of the first page. "Belonging is not a luxury, it's a right." And then he got to work. The video clip had made its rounds. Not just the footage of Elias being relocated mid-flight, but the entire exchange. Natalie's cold dismissal, Brent's smug commentary, the moment Elias calmly showed who he was. It had racked up over 12 million views across platforms in 24 hours. But what came next? That was the twist no one saw coming. On the morning after Nadine Rios's exposé, Elias sat in the modest Brooklyn office of the Equity Lab, a nonprofit he'd funded quietly for years. He was dressed down in jeans and a gray button-up, seated beside a whiteboard filled with names and community partners. Across from him sat Kira Hall, the nonprofit's founder, her energy uncontainable. "You just handed the world the blueprint," she said. "This wasn't just a corporate takedown. It's proof the system can be cracked open from the top." Elias nodded, though his tone remained measured. "Cracked isn't enough. It has to be rebuilt." Kyra leaned forward. "What's your next move?" He tapped the edge of the table, thoughtful. "I want to flip the airline's own platform against them. Turn their elite program into something inclusive. Make first class mean first in equity, not exclusion." Kira's eyes widened. "You're serious?" "I'm going to pilot it through Valcor's travel subsidiary, create a rewards program where every mile traveled contributes to funding equity grants, community infrastructure, and pro bono legal defense." Kyra blinked. "You're literally rewriting what loyalty means." "That's the idea." But as Elias worked to shape the future, the past was scrambling to keep up. Inside Atlantic Air's internal comms network, chaos reigned. Old emails were being leaked anonymously to reporters. One exchange between Bryce and Langford included a damning thread titled Image Control, Passenger Risk Factors, which listed names and ethnicities beside commentary like Watch List for Seat Disputes and History of Boarding Conflict, Potential Downgrade. Worse, multiple complaints filed by employees of color had quietly been closed without investigation. The press wasn't the only one watching now. The Department of Transportation had announced a formal inquiry. Congressional oversight was in motion, and shareholders, they were panicking. Inside the sleek glass tower of the airline's HQ, an emergency board meeting was called. It didn't go as planned. The chairwoman, Angela Chu, an industry veteran known for her icy pragmatism, addressed the remaining leadership team. "Let me be clear," she said, hands folded. "We're not fighting Elias Warren. We're answering to every passenger he now represents. This isn't about one seat, it's about a pattern." She glanced toward the back where two new faces sat, regulatory liaisons from Washington. Their presence was not optional. At the center of the table sat an envelope. Inside, a resignation letter. Marla Hayes. She had been the vice president of guest experience, the architect behind comfort stratification, a term now dissected in editorials as a euphemism for modern segregation. Angela opened the envelope, scanned the letter, and sighed. Effective immediately. No one argued. Downstairs in the building's cafeteria, whispers flew like static. Some employees were relieved, others were scared. A few were furious, still convinced that the company was only bending under pressure, not changing out of principle. In a corner booth, Natalie sat staring into a paper coffee cup, eyes empty. Evan slid into the seat across from her. He didn't speak right away. "You think you're next?" he finally asked. She didn't look up. "I know I am." He nodded slowly. "I heard Bryce got pulled into federal review this morning. Internal communications are part of the investigation." Natalie's jaw flexed. "I made a mistake," she said flatly. "But it wasn't just mine." "No, it wasn't," Evan agreed. "But it started with one choice, and we all made one." She glanced at him for the first time. "And what was yours?" "To write a letter," Evan said. "To speak at the Equity Summit next month. I'm not hiding behind seniority anymore." Natalie gave a bitter laugh. "Too late for me." "Maybe," Evan said, "but it's not too late to own it." Back in Brooklyn, Elias stood before a small audience in a community center, addressing college students, teachers, local activists. There were no press cameras, no live stream, just people hungry for a different kind of leadership. "Power," he said, "is not just a seat at the table. It's what you do when you see that table pushing others out." He paused, scanning the room. "You don't fix the problem by sitting quieter. You fix it by flipping the table." Thunderous applause followed. But Elias didn't stay for long. He had a call to make. Back at his private office, he picked up the phone and dialed a familiar number. The line clicked. "Angela," he said. "It's Elias. I figured you'd call. I'm not calling for apologies. I wouldn't offer one if you were." "Good," Elias said. "Then you'll understand what's coming next." There was a silence on the line, then Angela spoke. "What do you want?" "Accountability, full structural audit, equity board oversight, union inclusion for in-flight staff. And your next diversity officer?" "I'll be hand-picking them." Angela exhaled sharply. "You're not just trying to reform us." "No," Elias said. "I'm rebuilding what you failed to imagine." Then he hung up. The storm he started wasn't over. It was just entering its strongest surge. 3 weeks after the flight that rocked an industry, the world had changed. At least, parts of it had. Atlantic Air was still standing, but not untouched. The CEO had been forced into early retirement. Bryce Langford was terminated with cause. Natalie was suspended indefinitely, her name now synonymous with corporate coldness. Internal policies were gutted and rewritten with unprecedented speed. PR firms flooded their strategy decks with the Elias effect, trying to teach brands how not to implode. But for Elias Warren, none of that was the end goal. It was the beginning. On a cool Thursday morning in Washington, D.C., the National Transportation Equity Forum opened its doors to a packed audience. Inside the grand marble atrium of the Capitol Events Hall, hundreds of journalists, activists, airline executives, lawmakers, and students took their seats. A polished podium stood center stage, and behind it, the logo of a new initiative gleamed in soft silver. Flight Forward. Elias stood backstage, adjusting the cuff of his tailored gray suit. He wasn't nervous. He was ready. From the wings, Kira Hall gave him a nod. She had been working with his team nonstop, co-chairing the nonprofit wing of Valcor's new equity division. Beside her stood Evan, now a program coordinator for Flight Forward, helping train airline crews nationwide on unconscious bias and passenger dignity protocols. The kid was different now, shoulders square, voice steady. A voice came over the PA. "Please welcome Elias Warren." The room erupted in applause. Elias took the stage with calm control, eyes sweeping across the sea of faces. He didn't use a teleprompter. He didn't need one. "I was demoted in silence," he began, "removed from a seat I paid for, not because of my credentials, not because of a mistake, but because I didn't look like power." A hush fell across the crowd. They didn't ask. They didn't check. They assumed, and assumptions, when left unchecked, become policy. He paused, letting the weight settle. But here's the twist they didn't see coming. I was never trying to expose one flight. I was trying to expose a system. Soft murmurs of agreement rolled through the room. We're not here today to rehash the injustice. We're here to launch the reform. Flight Forward isn't about fixing PR. It's about building trust. For every passenger who's ever felt unseen, unheard, or unworthy based on bias disguised as policy, this is for you. Applause grew. Elias continued. Power is not proven by where you sit. It's proven by how you stand. And from this point forward, no one gets moved without accountability. No one gets silenced without someone asking why. He nodded once, firmly. We're changing the altitude. Together. As he stepped back from the podium, the audience rose to their feet, a standing ovation. Not out of obligation, but out of something deeper, recognition and hope. Afterward, Elias walked through the halls, shaking hands with lawmakers, equity leaders, even former critics who now wanted to collaborate. A young woman approached him with tears in her eyes. "My dad was a flight attendant," she said softly. "He quit after being passed over for promotion 5 times. He told me last week. He's proud again." Elias smiled. "Tell him he helped clear the runway. Now it's time to fly." Later that night, he sat alone in his office, sipping tea as the skyline of D.C. blinked in soft orange. On his desk sat a thick folder. Internal audits, airline responses, future recommendations. He closed it gently. There was more to do. Always would be. But this chapter was done. He opened his laptop, logged into his company's platform, and began writing a letter to the public. Not a speech, not a press release, just a message. To anyone who has ever been asked to move, physically, emotionally, professionally, so someone else could feel more comfortable, know this: you didn't lose your place. They just never knew where you truly belonged, but now they do. The letter went live. Within hours, it trended across the country. And with that, Elias shut his screen, leaned back in his chair, and finally let out a quiet breath he'd been holding for far too long. Because justice doesn't always scream. Sometimes it walks down the aisle in silence and changes everything. If this story shook you, made you pause, made you feel, don't just scroll. Like, subscribe, and drop a comment below. Where are you watching from? And more importantly, have you ever been asked to move? We're listening, and we're not going anywhere.